Hello, everybody. Welcome to Wild Portishead Live tonight. And, well, we're going to cut to the chase. We have a very special guest with us this evening. Chris, would you like to introduce our very special guest, please?
Yeah, a good friend of mine lives in Devon, on around the outskirts of, or in Dartmoor, can't quite remember now. And I think you titled him, didn't you, Jonathan? What did you say? The Bill Oddie of Trees.
I did. I very soon regretted that. Especially after I got the letter from Bill Oddie. So,
and I've known Ian for quite a few years now. Yeah. We're going a bit grey, mate. And without a shadow of a doubt, Ian is a tree expert. And I think this session is going to be particularly exciting because Ian really knows his trees. And it follows beautifully on from our last live. But first of all, let me ask Ian. Ian, how did you get into trees? What's your background with trees?
I've just always liked them, always appreciated them. I spent 20 years working for the Forestry Commission as a ranger. So obviously that involved a lot of trees. But, even as a kid, I can just remember going up local common and scrambling up trees and climbing up trees and falling out of trees and just being fascinated by them. The conker tree outside our primary school, it was just brilliant. For the conkers, but for the sticky buds as well in the spring. It was just, I don't know, always had a thing for trees, I guess.
I think there's quite a few of us that were like that, but you went deeper, didn't you? I mean, it's and you've actually got a book out on trees, haven't you? Have you got a copy there you can hold up to show everybody? You're going to want people to buy this book, mate.
Well, I've got. I did this one. This is a self-published book called A Tree Miscellany. That's available on Amazon. I've written a few of those sort of books. I've got the one that's currently at the moment. It's actually all about vultures, which is with Whittles Publishing, which is a vulture landscape, and that's about my time in central Spain. And I've got a book coming out with Whittles again in February, which is called Seasonality, and that's about the seasons in Britain. It's about just what's happening really and why it's happening, but also how it feels, how it makes me feel as well. It's quite opinionated as I can be sometimes, but it's about what I'm seeing in the seasons, why it's happening, and what I think of it. And after that, I've got another book which is going to look at the relationships between birds and trees, and some of the things I'm researching at the moment are just fascinating. Just
brilliant.
It blows your mind. And I mean, I didn't realise we had birds that pollinate trees in this country. I thought it was something that happened in tropics. But one of our commonest birds, the blue tit, is the pollinator of one of our commonest trees, the goat willow. And I didn't even know that. I mean, it's just, I don't know, it's incredible. You start looking and you can find out so much stuff.
It's I think you said it, didn't you? It's seeing the wood for the trees. I mean, I've got two little ones at the moment, one of 4, one of 2, and I take them up the woods. They climb the trees. They're doing exactly what you're talking about. And I always remember this about our now 4-year-old when he was 2 years old, and that was that he went for a walk in the woods with somebody who was actually looking after them at the time when I was working, and he went up the woods, and the lady in question, Val, really good friend of ours, she was about 60 at the time. She went up the wood and she came back white as a ghost. And I said, what the hell's happened? What's wrong? And she said, Zach's just identified all the trees along the path, and I don't know any of them, and I'm 60 years old. And that's the buzz, isn't it? That's the jizz. Once you get that buzz, off you go.
I think it's amazing that trees are something that everyone loves. I mean, if you start to, cut down a tree in a public space, people are instantly up in arms. Yet very few people actually know trees. They don't know them. They don't know. They'll look at a tree and they'll call it an oak, and they think, oh, we've just got one oak. We've got 2 species of oak that are native to Britain. Both are very, very common. You've got peduncular oak, which tends to be called English oak, which is a very bad name for it, by the way, because it's found all the way across Europe and into Asia. And you've got sessile oak as well. They're both very common. It's the same with the birches. You've got downy birch and you've got silver birch. There are probably 50% of the birch trees you see are downy birch, yet everyone calls them silver birch. And You
Yeah.
wouldn't do that if you only had two species of thrush. Everyone would know the thrush
Yeah.
species. It's with trees, we're very blind to them. It's quite an amazing thing. We love them, but we don't know that much about them generally. People, I don't know, they appreciate trees. It seems to be a blind spot. And the beauty is with trees is they don't run away, they don't fly away, they just stay there. You can walk right up to them. They're a good guidebook, and you'll be able to identify them really easily.
That's something I know from talking to you, obviously a while ago. That's something that really frustrates you, isn't it? That kind of lack of appreciation and education towards the trees compared to other wildlife.
Yeah, I think for people that are just out enjoying themselves, it's great that they don't know and they want to know. But it's when you watch programs on television with very good, well-respected naturalists, and they're misidentifying trees. There was one a few years ago that I wrote a blog for on Mark Avery's website, where a very, very, very popular wildlife program that comes out, shall we say, in the spring, and one of the presenters referred to some Scots pine as being fir trees. Well, I know a lot of people do that with conifers, but it would be like calling an avocet a duck. I mean, they just wouldn't do it if it was a bird. So why do it for trees? It's I don't know. I find it very odd, and I find it infuriating because I am a bit of a pedant.
Let's cut to the chase, and obviously, with the news that came out from the UN yesterday, you've got a lot of the public now concerned about the environment, and a lot more after yesterday, and actually concerned about the fact that forests right across the planet, mostly across the northern hemisphere, of course, are currently being burnt down. And we have now what we see, indeed here locally as well, as a real rush to try and repair some of that damage, and also to fight off, if you like, climate change by using trees. What's your opinion on that?
Wow. um, we are in a massive rush to plant trees. And if we need to know what we're planting trees for, the last general election, every political party was saying that they were going to plant X billion trees. Each were trying to outdo each other. It was like top trumps. It was ridiculous. But they weren't saying why they were planting trees. And you plant trees for purposes. If you want to plant trees to grow timber, then it's called forestry, and it's very different to creating a woodland for wildlife. You get wildlife in forestry, but if you want to create a woodland for wildlife or for amenity value, let the woodland create itself. Trees will plant and grow themselves. They do not need us. After all, we evolved in trees. We didn't plant those trees, we evolved in them. Okay? Trees look after themselves. They've been doing it for millennia, well, millions and millions of years. And your last guest, your last broadcast, said to you at one stage that all they're trying to do is give nature a helping hand. Nature doesn't need a helping hand; it needs a free hand to thrive.
Good.
Nature will do it. It doesn't need us, and we have a big problem as humans realizing that nature doesn't need us. It's a big issue for us. But trees will grow without us interfering, and the easiest, the cheapest, the greenest way of creating a woodland from a wildlife point of view is just to let it develop itself. It costs us nothing. It costs us nothing in carbon. You have all this stuff about planting trees to offset carbon footprints. I'd love to see, and there's a blog that I've written recently, which I know is a link on your Facebook page. I would love to see an environmental audit done on tree planting that looks at the carbon cost of collecting the seeds, because they're normally collected from seed orchards, and those trees are very heavily managed. There's the transportation cost there. They go to a tree nursery, and tree nurseries are very artificial places. They require loads of water. They may well require chemicals, depends on the tree nursery. And then they're lifted from that. They're transported again. Planters are brought in on contract. They drive to the sites. There's a huge carbon cost. So when those trees go into the ground, they're actually in carbon negative equity, and we're supposed to be offsetting carbon by planting them. If you allow the tree to just, germinate itself, if it comes out of a blackbird, that tree's instantly in carbon positive.
I was going to say, we've got one of the kind of like the hot topics in Portishead at the moment is Western Bigwood. Well, Western Bigwood, technically Northwestern, but you know what I mean, Chris. Well, it is Northwestern, but technically Portishead. That's what I meant to say. But we got Western Bigwood, which is it's an Avon Wildlife Trust run nature reserve. It's also a site of special scientific interest, and it is under threat from two sides from potential development in surrounding land. Now, developers will tell council officers that this is perfectly compatible, and it's not going to cause a problem for the woods. Chris and I are of the opinion is that far from hemming in the woods, that wood needs to expand outwards. Yeah. It's already suffering from the amount of human footfall literally going through it because of people visiting the place, but it's in a prime spot to actually grow out, and that's one of the key things that we're using to try and stop any development is saying no, this wood needs to expand, and it will expand, and it will do it naturally, as Chris will tell you.
Yeah, well, this is it. I mean, there's just been a study by the CEH, which is the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, based at Monk's Wood in Britain, and they just published a scientific paper on allowing woodlands to just expand out. Basically, they had two sites alongside an existing ancient woodland, and they managed them for I think one was 15 years, one was longer. But they haven't managed them; they just left them. And they've developed into woodland, and basically the woodland develops as it will. I mean, it's succession. It's what happens. You stop the mowing, and basically it was derelict farmland. They stopped the farming. They allowed it to develop. They didn't need to put plastic tree tubes in because bramble, blackthorn, all the rest of it is a tree tube. It's the natural tree tube. They didn't have any issues with grazing or browsing by herbivores, even though they had roe deer and muntjac present. The trees still develop. There'd have been some damage from the deer, but at the end of the day, you're not growing the trees commercially. You're allowing them to develop, and you just let it happen. And it's so easy. I don't know the wood you're talking about, but I'm sure if you looked at it on a satellite map, you'll see it's hemmed in around it. You could easily just soften those edges.
Alert from Google Chrome. Producer Matt Norman on the making of Blizzardar.
I don't know what that was.
It wasn't me.
But you could allow, trees to just naturally regenerate in an area by removing the mowing, removing sheep or cattle, whatever it is you've got around there, and you'll expand the woodland out. And the benefits for wildlife will be huge, but also for carbon offsetting. I mean, it'll do it instantly for you.
This is another site in Portishead, Chris, Battery Point. Battery Point is right next to Eastwood, which is ancient woodland, and Eastwood wants to creep out onto Battery Point. But if you keep mowing it, and this is the irony, you keep mowing it and mowing it and mowing it, and then go, we're going to plant some trees here. And the plastic tree guards are going to shatter because it's in a spot that catches northerly and southwesterly winds, which you then have a beauty spot covered in lots of little sharp bits of plastic, polluting the environment, and everybody's clapping themselves on the backs and saying, aren't we clever, we're rewilding. And that's the issue we have, is just to say, well, you're not. You're actually you're almost like, to use a metaphor that Chris will enjoy, this is almost the prime directive, isn't it, Chris? Non-interference. And we're actually going in there and we're interfering and we're creating a complete and utter mess, and then we're going, but we're doing it for the right reasons. And it's like, no. Proper rewilding, actually looking at it and looking at the sites and thinking, what can we do here? How can we let nature show us what to do? To a large extent, that hasn't happened because what I hate to, I don't want to use the P word, but what politicians like, they want an instant hit. They want something that they can go, look at that, look what we've done. Move on to the next thing. And I think the concern Chris and I have with all this kind of thing is that if you muck it up by trying to kind of artificially rewild, then people won't want to be interested next time round when you're actually trying to do proper rewilding.
No, I mean, plastic tube trees isn't rewilding.
No.
You know, I've seen so many instances where landowners, particularly local authorities, have mown a site, then sprayed it with a herbicide to kill the grasses, and then they planted trees that would have been growing there naturally, and they stick plastic tubes around them. And because they've killed the grasses off, there's no natural mulch there. It's just bare soil. And I know the weather at the moment is not great, but you give them a week of sunshine and they desiccate and they die because they've got no root development, because they've been lifted from a tree nursery where the roots have been deliberately grown to be shallow so they're easy to shift. There's no fungal associations with those roots in the ground. And they're struggling as soon as you put them in. And because you've taken away any herb layer, grass layer, because you sprayed it, you've mown it, whatever, they just desiccate straight away and they become very vulnerable.
Yeah, and this was the thing that we 2 years ago, Chris, before you know the pandemic struck, this was the thing that we were advocating. This was actually before the district council announced their own rewilding program, and that was source. You tell the story, Chris, because you'll tell it better than me.
The plan of 2019 was really simple. I'd spoken to you about this, Ian, and I'd spoken to other colleagues of yours that are still in the Forestry Commission, guys I hold up with absolute respect in terms of trees. And I said, look, I've got an idea. I'm not happy about bringing in trees from the outside. What if we collect seed from trees which are already here, and we get the public to grow them on, adopt them on, and then we get the public to decide where they want to put them, but they're literally going back in the area which they come from, but they're being given the help to move away from the parental tree that's overshadowing them. So if you like, to coin what we've been talking about already, you're literally getting the public to be the birds, except they're giving them a little bit of a longer help along. And I even went as far to put out to you guys as well that one of the other things I think we could do is speed things up by, for instance, if you look at where the council were mowing underneath trees, there were saplings growing, and they were being mown out, you know. And I thought, well, if we could stop them mowing, and okay, the parental tree might blanket them out, we could at least prick those out and give them somewhere to go, somewhere different. But again, the whole policy totally that the public should own this from the word go.
And I can remember when you first told me.
Yeah, that way you get out of that trap that you and Jonathan are talking about, that political trap, which is short-termism.
Tokenism.
And that is basically so that it only runs to the next election, and then the next lot that come in say, right, we're not doing that. That could go. You pass the whole thing over to the people, and you say, right, people, you run this, and you have longevity. It goes intergenerational. You get the schools on board, you get the clubs on board, you get everybody on board, and you have a big push. And when we did our original meeting, I came up with the figure of 30% extra trees within the urban area, all sourced locally.
Yeah, I can remember when you first said to me about your idea, and the first thing that struck me was what a great way of getting people not just involved, but having the ownership of the project. And you know, you plant a tree. I mean, I started my forestry career in 1992 up in Thetford Forest, and I was back up there. It was in 2019 now. It was pre-pandemic, and just driving through and thinking, I might have planted that area. You know, it's an amazing thing to think that you planted these trees, and you know, if you've got a local area that you've planted trees in as a child, what a brilliant thing to keep coming back to as you grow older and you get married, you have children, you have grandchildren, whatever. What a great thing. I mean, you cannot get a better sense of ownership than someone nurturing a tree and planting it. Now, I know I said that, you know, you don't need to plant trees. Well, planting has its place. I mean, I think the council in your area planted something like 25,000 trees. Well, you let the majority of those trees generate naturally, and you have areas where the local people have planted their own local trees, and the whole area they'll want to protect that whole area because their trees growing in amongst the other trees. It just made such perfect sense when you first told me it. I thought, what a great idea. And then I don't know. I mean, I've known you for a long time, and you're always one of the most optimistic people I've ever met, and you're always very, very up for things and that. And I've seen how it's made you quite cynical of what's happened, and that's unlike the Chris Ferring that I know, and I can understand why, because it's frustrating. It's such a great idea. It's a simple idea, and it's a cheap. It doesn't cost anything idea, and yet I don't know. It's just the whole industry of planting trees is just that. It's an industry. It's making money for people, and that's what's driving it.
I think the most frustrating thing, Ian, is that we had an idea, and people loved it, and even the council loved it, and it went very, very quiet. And the next thing we know, they're doing their own thing, and and when it comes to looking at natural regen, the most frustrating thing for me is that I can see things going wrong. I can see the public turning against tree planting because of the fact that the trees are being planted in the areas where the people are used to playing. And that was the whole idea of giving the people the job of saying, we want the trees here, we want the trees there. Now, one of the things that many councillors have mentioned to me, and I know to Jonathan as well, is the fact that you don't own the land; it belongs to the council, but we are the council taxpayers.
I was going to say, aren't the councillors just your representatives?
Yeah. So that's been the most frustrating thing for me, is that I can see where it's going wrong. I can see the members of the public getting really, really upset about this. I can see the solution for this, and then when we come up with the solution, talk to us.
I know.
It is. We continue to persevere, but it's, as I say, it's we from the outset, when we had our Wild Portishead meeting 2 years ago, the thing that we said was this has to be like nature. This has to be from the ground up. You cannot do it top down. You cannot say to people, we are doing this, you are having trees, and you are having trees here and that out, and that's it. I'm now being attacked by the co-host, and this is what we're trying to course correct at the moment. Is this kind of top down thing where, choose my words carefully here, but you're trying to course correct something that a lot of the time you get the feeling it doesn't know where it wants to go. It's a series of slogans and press releases, but what are you actually trying to achieve here? Well, we're planting trees, yes, but to what end? Climate emergency, yes, but to what end? What are you trying to do? And it's.
I mean, I wrote a deliberately provocative blog a few years ago about planting trees for climate emergency, because I'd seen something on the news where a council had planted loads of oak trees as part of the climate emergency. And it's like, well, oaks are incredibly slow growing. They absorb carbon far slower than other trees. If you're purely planting trees for a carbon emergency, you need to think about what trees you're planting. Planting oaks, brilliant trees, but they're not going to be very good at absorbing carbon very quickly. I mean, the latest report from the UN says we need to act now. We don't need to be absorbing carbon in 200 years' time. We need to be absorbing it now, and therefore you need to think about the species of trees. And they don't. It's just a very glib, almost, oh, what can we do? I know, we'll plant some trees, and we'll just chuck in oak trees because they're English, even though they've got a large distribution that is far, far greater than England. What about Scotland, for example? I mean, it's a bit of an insult calling these trees English when they grow all over Britain, all over Europe, into Asia, North Africa as well. And it's like, no, that's the wrong tree. If you want to absorb carbon quickly, plant quick growing trees. your pioneer species, your silver birches, your goat willows. They're the trees that are going to turn up when you stop mowing. So just stop mowing. It's simple.
I mean, we're one of the things that we are still trying to push forward is if you know, one of our arguments is okay, if you're going to plant trees, create more community orchards. Because you've got knock-on effects there that you are they're not going to be massive carbon kind of like carbon sponges, but you are doing something there where you are aiding wildlife. You are doing something for the insects, you're doing something for the birds, you're doing something for the pollinators, and you're also, I say, you are engaging the people, because the people get the benefit at the end of hopefully getting some lovely fruit out of it. But then people then take ownership of it. Indeed. Because you've made that connection with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can have so much things you can do with an orchard in terms of the local community getting food from it, being involved. I mean, it's wood pasture, and it's a habitat that is very, very rare in Britain. It should actually be very common in Britain. And what's happened with the rewilding at Knepp Estate has shown that wood pasture is actually probably the more typical habitat when you've got your large herbivores present than actually closed canopy woodlands. And it's made people rethink exactly what our climatic vegetation would be in this country. And orchards are a brilliant example of a wood pasture system that has so many benefits for everybody, wildlife, people, and they're brilliant. What a great place an orchard is. I mean, they're fantastic for wildlife, but they're fantastic for people.
Yeah, and like I say, we're being in the West Country here. Well, we're all in the West Country here tonight, but you know what I mean. Being in Somerset and being the most northerly part of Somerset, cider country. But in Portishead, we have a shocking lack of orchards, and you know that's one of the things.
Can I just interrupt and cause a civil war there? I don't think Devon's a cider country.
No. If you want to cause a civil war, it's scones.
Oh,
right?
No.
That's no. But I'll say, Chris, the other thing, if you could just elaborate on this, is also where we live here. We live on pretty much the most northerly part of the Somerset Levels, aren't we? Effectively, with the Gordano Valley. But we were talking about, you were talking about the idea of wet woodlands as well, weren't you? On the floodplains.
I've got a passion for wet.
Passion for.
Ian, you talk about it. Wet woodlands.
Wet woodlands. I mean, they're fantastic. I mean, a bit of Oldercar is just a great place, and the one landscape architect you need is going to be Beaver. They create wet woodlands brilliantly. And I have to say, they're in Devon, Chris, and doing very well. But
Ian,
wet
for a
woodlands
second.
are a thriving habitat, and they'll succeed. I mean, they'll grow on, and they'll dry out eventually. It's drying out, turning into art, and they're just a tangle of life. That's what makes them so amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Actually, question for you, Ian, is if we think back to the huge floods that we had on the Somerset Levels, 10 years ago now, do you think a contributory factor to that was humankind trying to reclaim land that is naturally a floodplain anyway? But do you think a contributory factor to that would have been the clearing of so much woodland that would have existed on that floodplain?
Woodland and scrub, I mean, it's very heavily grazed in parts. Water hits the ground and runs. It doesn't get held up. There's been so much work done recently with various beaver projects on how, just by slowing the water down and then creating these wetter woodlands, these scrubbier areas, it slows that water down. It's released in a trickle rather than in a flood. And we're architects of our own problems always.
Yes.
We build in floodplains. there's a clue in the name. You know, we shouldn't be building there, and we do that, and we put large expanses of concrete, and water runs straight off that. It's got to go somewhere. We need to, you know, I really do think we need to start looking at how other people do it. You look at how the Dutch manage, you know, in a very overcrowded country, how they manage their waterways, and they're predominantly at sea level or below sea level. And yeah, I know they've had some flooding recently, but they're very good at managing their water, and they do that with wild areas. They've got some fantastic rewilded areas that just hold back the water. They're like sponges. Wet woodlands like sponges. They hold that water. They release it slowly. Heavily grazed farmland or arable land that's just, you know, got a plough pan because it's been ploughed so often, the water just hits it and just runs straight off. You might as well be raining on tarmac, really.
Why don't we move on to talking about a very special tree, a tree which I know you're fascinated with all trees and very enthusiastic about all trees, but one in particular is called white beam. And you think we might be a bit special here in Portishead?
I've always thought you were special, Chris.
To the post.
The white beams, the white beam family in Britain. You've got common white beam, and then you've got rowan. A lot of people don't think rowan's white beam, but it is. You've got wild service tree as well, and they're like your free species of white beam. And then you look a bit closer, and it turns out we have got dozens and dozens, 40, 50 species of endemic, found nowhere else on the planet, white beams that are our very own. Down here in Devon, we've got 5 species that are endemic to this area. In Portishead, you've got a tree called the roundleaf white beam. You're right in the heart of its global distribution. You know, there's a few in the Mendips, there's a few in the Avon Valley, and there's a few across the water in South Wales and extending a little bit up into the Wye Valley. And that's it. That's its entire global distribution. And, you know, you're saying about having people selecting seeds and growing on their own trees. Why not grow on Portishead's own tree? I mean, you know, we don't have roundleaf white beam down here. We just don't have it. You know, so you could have that. The road signs, you come into Portishead, welcome to Portishead, have a roundleaf white beam planted by it. It's your tree. It's unique. It's endemic, and it's something that, you know, you said about I get frustrated. Well, we should be shouting from the rooftops that we've got these trees. They're evolution in progress. These are trees that have evolved since the last ice age. They're nowhere else in the world. And we should be really banging on about the fact that these are our very own unique trees. And you don't hear anything about it. I mean, my favourite white beam is the no parking white beam, which is found in one valley on Exmoor, on the Devon side. And that's it. There's 100 and maybe 7, 8 trees in the world in this valley. And that is it. Yeah. And it's on land that's owned by a national conservation organisation, and there's nothing about it whatsoever on their interpretation stuff. One of the trees, the type specimen, the first one that was identified in the 1930s, is actually right by their car park, and you just walk past it. There's nothing to tell you that this is a unique tree, and that's on land that's owned by a conservation organisation. I mean, what, you know, if they had a butterfly in that valley that was found nowhere else in the world, there'd be signs, there'd be images everywhere of this butterfly. The tree, no mention at all. So yeah, you've got your own roundleaf white beam. It's found in a few spots, but Portishead is right in the heart of its global distribution, and it's your unique tree. And I know you found some because you sent photos of them to me. You know, I'd love to come up and see it with you sometime. I know I said I'll do that, and we will do that. But October, late September, October, when the fruits are ripe, getting local people to gather them, grow them in seed. The next spring they grow quite quickly as well, and then planting them out. They're your own tree. I mean, you don't get more local than a tree that's endemic to your area.
In a Michael Caine moment, I've literally, hang on, lads, I got a great idea. All right, I can see a sign now, and it says, "Welcome to Portishead, home of the roundleaf white beam," and then a little silhouette of a tree as people are driving into Portishead. What do you reckon, Chris?
Why not?
Well, I think it's great, and if there's any town and district councillors representing Portishead that are actually watching this or watch this and later on, as I know most of them do, make a note of what Ian's been saying, because I think we should highlight this, and this is something we can really run with, and it's something that we should be talking about in the schools as well when we do school visits locally.
Yeah.
And
we have our own tree. Just think about that for a second. We have our own tree. It's available elsewhere, but they mostly, it's a bit like cheddar cheese. It's available around the world, but it mostly all comes from one area. And I think, Portishead, home of the round leaf white bean. If only we knew a graphic artist who could knock something up to that effect.
There's a job for you, Jonathan, when you're
doing
it's great. I mean, the thing is with these white beams is they're dotted mainly across the western half of the country. But I mean, the Isle of Arran's got it's got 2 species endemic to it. There's Lancaster, South Wales has got a few. Say Devon's got 5. Some of those creep into Somerset along the Exmoor coast. You've got cheddar, not very far away from you at all. It's got several species there. I mean, there's 2 cliffs whitebeam that grows in Cheddar Gorge on 2 cliffs. That's it. That's its entire global distribution. They're just not made a thing of, and their biology is complicated, and identifying them can be a bit difficult. Although roundleaf whitebeam from the photos that Chris has sent me seems fairly straightforward. It's a whitebeam and it's got a very round leaf. But they're unique, and they're a great lesson in evolution for a start. But also, there are trees. These areas have their own trees, and what can be better than having your own tree?
I think I was going to say, Chris, I think what we actually need to do is actually on the various wildlife maps that we're running is actually start mapping where these trees are in Portishead.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. What would be the main threats to them? Is there any, apart from potential diseases coming in, of course?
The main threat to trees is always humans. If I say to you, what's the tallest tree in the world? People go, oh, it's a redwood. It's a coast sequoia is the tallest tree in the world. But the next question is always why? And people can't answer that. And the simple reason that the tallest tree in the world is the tallest tree in the world is because we haven't cut it down yet. And that is unfortunately the truth. And I always, whenever I had groups when I was working for the Forestry Commission, from academics through to primary school children, I'd always ask those 2 questions. And when I said why, I'd get all sorts of wonderful answers about sea mists and root development and all the rest of it. But only the children would ever get it right, because they were the ones that would say, because we haven't cut it down yet. And they're the ones that are right, because sadly, the coast redwoods that are there are remnants of what should be the tallest trees in the world. And they're probably, in America's, it'd probably be Douglas fir, a tree that you have plenty of growing in the Quantocks. And they would be the tallest trees in the world. But their timber is something that we value more than redwood timber. And they have reached maybe 130, 140 meters in height in the past. The tallest tree in the world now is around about 107 meters tall. So they could be a lot taller. In Australia, there's a type of eucalyptus, confusingly called the mountain ash eucalyptus, which is a great British name again. But that they think they had specimens up to 150 meters tall, almost 50 meters tall, almost 50 meters taller than the current tallest tree. So the biggest threat to these whitebeams is us, is mowing the regen, not allowing these trees to spread. We often get Devon whitebeam growing in hedgerows, and most of them get butchered by the flail every year, and they never set seed. They never fruit, because the flails come out in August. They flail it all back. They don't, the flowers never develop into fruit. So you don't get the birds picking the fruits and then distributing the seeds. So the biggest threat is always ourselves. So mapping them, because at the end of the day, your trees are actually globally significant, because you can't just go out and get them from somewhere else. They are with you, and that is it.
Wow,
that's
powerful.
As the saying goes, mind blown.
Yes. Well, it is. But, I mean, it's amazing. It is amazing. When I first discovered the whitebeams, I was writing an article, and it was like, we've got our own trees. What, Devon whitebeam? I'm a very proud Devonian, and it's like, there's a tree called Devon, and it's just, well, now I've got loads growing in my garden, and I collect seeds. I'm giving away seedlings to people to grow in their gardens all the time because it's like we should all have them. I mean, they're just, they're our tree.
Ian, if you don't mind, just got some questions in the comments section here. So if you don't mind fielding a couple of questions here, we have a question here from Mr. Bob Cartwright, who also happens to be a councillor for your neck of the woods, Chris. Yeah. And he says, can you roughly tell the age of the tree by the side of the trunk if you can identify it?
I'm guessing he means by the size of the trunk. You can do ballpark calculations on the circumference of a tree, about 1.5 meters off the ground. There are various figures you can look up on the internet for it, but what you've got to realise with trees is they're individuals, and depending on how they've grown, the size will be different. So if they've grown in a confined space in woodland, they won't be as large as if they've grown in an open field, for example. If they've grown next to another tree and then that tree's fallen or been felled or whatever, they'll be smaller than necessarily the age. There's aging trees, by looking at them, is fraught with danger. You can take measurements and you can do rough ballpark figures. I think 1 inch of diameter equals a year, but it's a bit iffy, to be honest. If you ever look, if you ever see a stump, look at the rings of a tree, and you will see that they vary massively in just one tree. If it's very, very dry weather, they'll hardly put on any growth. If late frosts, they'll hardly put on any growth. So it can be really deceiving.
I got a comment here from Emily Morrison, and she says, I listened. Thank you, Emily. And she says, our baby oak is coming along nicely. And Laura New Clement says, if you want some oak saplings, we have some self-seeded and growing nicely at our allotment. So there you go, Chris. This is what you want. Laura also says, if you get the schools involved to get the children to grow trees and then ask the council to tell us what land we can plant them, I'm sure people would be interested in participating. That, I do believe, Chris, was
what we wanted to do, and we've had problems, Laura.
Yeah, but why not get them planting their white beans at the schools?
Yeah, absolutely. And Fiona Melford says, I planted a cider orchard in the field 7 years ago, which is jolly good. We need more cider. Well, we need more orchards in Portishead. We need more cider. We got another comment here, which is from Laura Porter, our producer, and she says, cream then jam. Laura doesn't know. She doesn't know what she's talking about. So
when you make a sandwich, do you put butter on, or do you put your ham on first, or your veggie whatever?
A, I don't eat sandwiches. B, I didn't put butter on anyway, and 3, I'm a vegetarian. So
well, okay, I walked into that. Yeah, but no, I'm sorry.
Butter normally first.
What do you do on Tuesday night? I started watching it for the wildlife, but just to send into an argument about cream teas as always. So, Chris,
it's definitely cream first.
Chris, anything else? Anything else? Whilst we've still got Ian on the show.
Yeah, I mean, basically, Ian, you've plugged the book, and one of the books that you've got is your brilliant book on vultures, and obviously, I know vultures from my trips down to Provence. But Ian, we're not the BBC, so would you like to actually advertise what you're actually doing in Spain? I'm sure there'll be many people out there that would be interested in what you're actually up to in Spain.
Well, yeah, I mean, I run bird tours out in Extremadura, which is a real birders' paradise. I mean, you've got your 3 species of vulture, 5 species of eagle, you've got both bustards, you've got bee-eaters, rollers, azure-winged magpies. It's just a stunning place. Obviously, at the moment, I'm not running bird tours out in central Spain. There's a little bit of an issue going on. Yeah, I've been doing that. I mean, I live out there for part of the year. We've lived out there permanently. And we run a business called Griffin Holidays. That's Griffin as in Griffin Vulture. And yeah, we take small groups. We only have a maximum of 4 people. It's a minibus-free birding. But yeah, I mean, that's obviously on hold at the moment. Should be out there next spring. I'm fully booked the next year as well. So it's something that I love doing. I love showing people the birds, and occasionally throw in the odd tree as well, and start testing their knowledge on trees, which confuses them sometimes. But yeah, I mean, you know me, I'll talk about wildlife till the cows come home. Oh, your lights have come on.
Yeah. It's not just birds, is it? Because I mean, there's other things going on in Spain at the moment. I mean, I know you've talked to me a lot about the snakes that you see, the other reptiles that you see.
Yeah.
What about the Iberian lynx?
Oh man, the lynx is doing really well. I mean, that's a proper conservation success story. You know, you've got a species, an endemic species to the Iberian Peninsula. It's a lot smaller than the lynx that we should have in Britain, and it was heading for extinction. It's simple as that. The genetic gene pool had just shrunk right down. There were less than 100 species left. There's now less than 100 examples left, and there's now well over 1,000 species. I think the latest count was around about 1,200 species. Been really intensive conservation effort, but they focused not just on the animal itself, but on the habitat, getting the habitat right. You know, removing the threats that were an issue to it, but also getting its food right. I mean, this is an animal that predates rabbits, and Iberia is actually an old word meaning land of the rabbit. Rabbits aren't from Britain; they're not native here, but they are native to Iberia. And this link, the rabbit population had suffered with myxomatosis, and then the VHD disease as well. Had really suffered, and the predator had also suffered as well, and got so low in numbers it was struggling. So they really focused. I mean, I remember when I very first started going to central Spain, seeing areas fenced off saying, keep out rabbit reserve. And you think, why on earth do you need a reserve for rabbits? You know, but they were focusing on the species, the Iberian lynx's needs before they were focusing on the Iberian lynx. They were getting the habitat right, the food right. You look at bearded vulture in the Alps. The reintroduction project there, a fantastic success. They were wiped out at the beginning of the last century. They're now back in great numbers. They're breeding. I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but they're into the hundreds now breeding. They're doing brilliantly out there. But they focused on the food for them and the habitat long before they focused on actually reintroducing the species.
Yes.
And that's what you need to do. And the best way of creating a habitat is to allow nature to manage itself and stop the mowing.
Absolutely. We are going to be right up against the clock here now. So I'm just going to reminder from Laura here. She says, a reminder of our iNaturalist project. Download the free app and get mapping while you're out and about. The data contributes to national record centres, and you can do that at www.inaturalist.org/observations. And you can download the app. We'll put the link up on the Facebook page. But Ian, it has been. Sorry, Chris, go on.
John, hear me, Jonathan.
Barely. Go on.
All right, Jonathan. Why don't we let Ian have the last word of the show? And why don't we get Ian to talk directly to our council? What should they do?
Well, they put cream first on their scones. I think they should listen to you guys. I mean, you know, I've been listening to you, Chris, talking about this project from when it first was an idea for you, and it seems such a great project. It seems really silly to just allow it to slip by for reasons that don't make a lot of sense to me. You can have people getting real ownership of the land, you know, a real sense of wanting to keep that land, protect that land, and whatever's growing in it and living in it and everything. It's a great opportunity for people to really engage. Plant some trees the way you suggested. I think it's brilliant, and especially things like the round leaf whitebeam, which probably needs a bit of help. But the other areas, just stop mowing them, let them develop. You'll be amazed what starts popping up in them, and you can turn it into projects for schools. You know, monitoring. You know, you stop mowing, let's see what happens, kids. Let's keep seeing what happens. You know, and asking those questions. Why are those trees here? Why are they doing this? Why is that? Why is this happening? It's an obvious thing to do, and you know, it's not rocket science. Nature will look after nature. We don't need to give it a helping hand. We just need to give it a free hand for it to thrive. And we need to realize that, you know, we don't have to over manage everything. And bringing in outsourced trees, 25,000 outsourced trees. I'd love to know what the carbon cost of those trees were and how long they're going to have to be in the ground to offset the carbon that they've created let alone what the carbon they're supposed to be offsetting.
I don't think we can add anything to that, Chris.
No.
So we'd just like to say, Ian, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on tonight, and you are more than welcome to come back anytime you want to. And I think, you know, it's been some real food for thought tonight. So anything else, Chris?
No, we'll put all the links up on our Facebook page.
Yep.
Then we'll double that as well, because this is going out on Twitter and YouTube. So the links to your books and your Spanish activities will all be on there, and of course your scone activities as well.
Thank you. Very important.
That's me done. Thanks a lot, Ian.
Yeah, thank you, Ian.
Jonathan.
Thank you to
Thank you.
everybody who's watching, and we'll be back with another live soon. But until then, stay safe, stay out of trouble, and we'll see you very, very soon. So, but from us all, thank you. Good night.